Alrighty, everyone, let's go ahead and map our respiratory reflexes on the extremities. First and foremost, we have to draw our guidelines, and for the respiratory reflexes, really we're mostly focused on horizontal zone 1 and 2, so we only need that shoulder line guideline just below the toes and that diaphragm guideline just below the ball of the foot. However, just for consistency, we'll draw our proximal heads of the fifth metatarsals for the waistline and the pelvic line. Okay, so from a lower respiratory standpoint, we have the lungs, and one of the things that I wanted to just clarify is that the left side for the client has the left lung, and the right side of the client has the right lung. Now, this is significant for a couple reasons. One, the left lung is two-lobed, so there are two lobes on the left lung. So if we wanted to kind of draw that as two lobes as opposed to just the single, and then the right lung has three lobes. And that's because from a spatial perspective, we have the heart on that left side as well. So only two lobes on the left versus three on the right. Just something interesting to think about. But then we also have the respiratory upper reflexes, which we'll use purple for, which is very much associated with the pads of the toes. So the necks of the toes representing the neck of the body, but then the pads of the toes representing that literal headspace. And we'll just do some polka dots to signify the sinuses, because that's really all sinuses are holes in the head that serve a purpose. So whenever you're palpating for any kind of head space issues, but especially in the sinuses, you always want to make sure to look at the toes and the toe pads. And that's pretty much it for the respiratory system. You can look at other master classes for the associated reflexes like the endocrine system, as well as the digestive reflexes, all the major joints, things like that. But that's pretty much it, would be the lungs and the sinuses. And if we really wanted to be specific with the trachea and that larynx, that would be midline of the body, so it would go past that thyroid on the medial side of the neck reflexes to connect with the lungs. So that air would come in through the sinuses and down through the lungs and then circle back. Make sense? Cool. Now let's move on to various aspects of the feet. When we look at the respiratory reflexes, it's also important to know that the reflexes are through and through. It's not just the plantar surface that we're focused on from an assessment standpoint. So let's map our respiratory reflexes just using those two guidelines on the dorsal surface, medial and lateral surfaces as well. So again, that shoulder line guideline is right where the toes meet the ball of the foot, and then the diaphragm guideline gives us the diaphragm, which is the base of the lungs. So all of this would be lung territory. Now remember, right to right, left to left. So this would be the client's right, and this would be the client's left. So we have the right lung, which would be the three lobes, 1, 2, 3. And that's just for visual purposes. And then we have the left lobe, which would be, or the left lung, which would be 1, 2. Excellent. And then something I really wanted to stress here is that the nails of the toes are my marker for the soft tissues of the face. This includes the inner ear, this includes the eyes, but it also pertains to the sinuses as well as the teeth as well. So really, when I'm focused on the sinus reflexes, I really make it a point to check, yes, the pads of the toes, but definitely the nails of the toes being representative of that softer facial tissue perspective. Okay, then on the, this is a right foot but then also we have it slightly medial, but this is all still very much lung, upper back, chest tissue. So we could even, 1, 2, 3. Then a little bit of sinus action on the nails of the toes that we can see. Okay, and then same thing here. This is actually a left foot, so we have 1, 2. And we could definitely throw the larynx in there as well. And then our little polka dots for the nails. Excellent. So those are the respiratory reflexes on the dorsal medial lateral aspect. Moving to our Huns, let's draw our guidelines first, and we'll draw all of them on this view. So our shoulder line, just above that notch of the thumb, just below the pad of the thumb. Then the diaphragm, proximal head of the fifth metacarpal, and then in between the first and second row of carpals. Now, a little bit confusing, anatomical position. This is the left hand, and this is the right hand. Okay? Because remember, they're turned outward, so it's a little bit different. So the right side, all of this would be chest-lung space. So if we wanted to 1, 2, and 3 for the right side, and then 1 and 2 for the left side, that would be how we would draw our lung space, but this would all be lung tissue. Palmar side of the knuckles. And then for the pads of the fingers, representing that same aspect of the pads of the toes, the sinus reflexes. All of that paddy tissue. And those are our respiratory reflexes for the palmar surface of the hand, but let's also go ahead and do the dorsal aspect as well. And here we can just do our top 2 guidelines for this exercise. Remember, the reflexes are through and through, so we really want to make sure that we count both aspects. Now that we have our guidelines drawn, we can go ahead and draw the dorsal aspect. So dorsal aspect, this would be a left hand, this would be a right hand, and the medial aspect would be represented by the thumb, lateral aspect by that little finger, and so we have lobe 1, lobe 2, lobe 3, and lobe 1 and lobe 2. And then the esophageal reflexes, or not just the esophageal reflexes, but also the larynx and voice box reflexes. And then the nails would really be what we're looking for here for the sinuses. Yay! So those would be our respiratory reflexes for the dorsal aspect of the hands. Remember, this is all respiratory tissue. Yes, it's also upper back because the dorsal aspect of the hand and dorsal aspect of the foot represent the back of the body, but this is also really sensitive and important lung tissue as well. Moving on to face. Draw our guidelines first. The eyebrows become the shoulder line guideline. The zygomatic bone becomes the diaphragm guideline. And then we extend the lip line for the waistline. And then we have that cleft of the chin all the way across the bottom for the pelvic line. And so the eyes are really our lung space. And we want to use that right side, left side again. So right side of face, left side of face. So we have 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3. Then all of those larynx reflexes. And then sinuses, we've talked about this before in other master classes, but if we draw that line, which would represent the deviation from a finger and toe standpoint, that proximal and middle phalange, that neck space, we delineate that there's a curve in the frontal bone of the head that's very present, which separates the neck from what would be the head space. So all of this would be sinus. It's really cool. You'll actually find bumps of congested tissue in through here, which always match perfectly with the sinus pressure and congestion. So that's very much what we want to look for in the face, but just recognize that the entire eye space is going to be respiratory. Fabulous. And last but not least, we have the ear. So we're going to take the crest of the helix just above the triangular fossa and create horizontal zone 1. Then below the triangular fossa, at the ridge just above the Simbaconcha, we have the diaphragm guideline in zone 2. And then that notch, that ridge in between Simbaconcha and cavum concha, gives us our zone 3. And then the base of the auditory opening just above the lobe gives us our pelvic line between zone 4 and 5. And right, left. Right ear, left ear. So the lungs definitely more through this triangular notch, but I do find them all throughout. So if we wanted to, we could say 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3. All of that would be chest lung space, but very specific to that triangular fossa. And then our respiratories that go up along the midline. And I find that the sinuses are very much in the hood of the crest of the helix. So it's all of this flap and underflap as well. This wave, this crested wave at the very top of the ear is head space. It's very sinus related. And those are the reflexes for the respiratory system across the various extremities. Now let's move on to our next part of the lecture.